gutters and siding on the side. Our window installation teams do our windows. We're both the installer and the manufacturer.
Said, is it easy for a homeowner to get a price?
Very easy. We'll come out to your house, we'll assess your current
Hi, do you see me? Hi, do you see me? Hi, do you see me?
Hi.
We'll be starting shortly.
Okay.
They even cleaned my windows. You just pick a date, pick a cleaner, and enjoy a spotless house for $19. I love using home.
We're about to start soon. Yeah, but it has my face. No, he left. I don't know. Right. Well, it is, but it's just at that. There.
Box here.
Yeah, and then we don't know if audio is going to be able to play.
I have questions about the audio.
We've got audio.
We do
I moved
have
it down
audio.
Oh, okay.
Okay, great.
Perfect. Okay. We should be good? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I moved it out of line, but you need to mute yours. You need to mute yours.
Afternoon to all who've joined us today. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the ranking member, Steve Cohen of Tennessee, is present. Additionally, we're really very fortunate to have Chaplain Margaret Kibben with us. She is the chaplain of the House of Representatives. Additionally, she is an admiral in the U.S. Navy. And then last month, she actually visited Kyiv, Ukraine, and visited with religious leaders of Ukraine. And so she is certainly a superstar standing up for the people of Ukraine, and so much appreciated. We will have other members of the commission come in and out. As always, there's so many competing meetings simultaneously. But as we begin today, today has been a historic day for Carson Cohen and myself to be on the House floor. And that is that we had a wonderful presentation today by the President of the Republic of Korea, Yoon Sung-yeol. And President Yoon gave an excellent speech to the people of the United States, and it was just an extraordinary opportunity. And I would like to read part of what he said because it relates to what we're doing today. And that is, my friends, freedom and democracy are once again under threat. The war against Ukraine is a violation of international law. It is an attempt to unilaterally change the status quo with force. Korea strongly condemns the unprovoked and armed attack against Ukraine. When North Korea invaded us in 1950, democracies came running to help us. We fought together. We kept our freedom. The rest is history. Korea's experience shows just how important it is for democracies to uphold solidarity. Korea will stand in solidarity with the free world. We will actively work and safeguard the freedom of the people of Ukraine and to support their efforts for reconstruction. End of quote. But what a remarkable indication of solidarity, perfectly clear, which is particularly incredible in that in 1960, after the Korean War, the per capita income of Korea was $67. Today, it's well over $30,000, and it went from an economy of zero to being the 10th largest economy in the world. And so free markets work, democracy works, and what a message for that for us to receive today, and what encouragement it can be for the people of Ukraine. Additionally, as we begin, I'd like to introduce for the record from the New York Times an article of December 31, 2022, and it's Clergymen Are Spies. Churches Become Tools of War in Ukraine. Additionally, from Time Magazine of April 15, 2022, How the Russian Orthodox Church is Helping Drive Putin's War in Ukraine. And without any objection, they shall be entered into the record. I'd also like to have these records in place and how important they are, which shows that this is not a new topic, but current events. And the arrest of Moscow-linked priests have brought things to a much clearer focus, which we will hear about today. The Helsinki Commission has long championed the need to protect freedom of religion and belief. Although Ukraine is a state of diverse religions, today's hearing will focus on the largest religious group in Ukraine, that is, Christians. We cannot talk about Christians in Ukraine without discussing war criminal Putin's full-scale war. The war has made life dangerous for many Christians in occupied areas of Ukraine who not only have to worry about their physical safety, but the protection of other freedoms, including the right to believe and worship according to one's conscience. Occupation authorities have used various tactics to deny believers the right to practice their faith, including by de facto banning religious groups not approved by the Russian-led occupation governments and destroying religious materials. The main targets are Christians not affiliated with the Moscow-controlled Union Orthodox Church, an arm of the Russian Orthodox Church, and any other non-traditional religions or beliefs, that is, religions that cannot be controlled by the Kremlin. Putin is also creating an additional challenge for the Ukrainian government. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church, technically under Moscow's control, though the level of loyalty may vary, the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which officially split off from the former, are fighting for the future of the Orthodoxy in Ukraine. The Kremlin has used Orthodox priests reporting to Moscow to engage in criminal activities against Ukraine on behalf of Putin, including full-blown wartime collaboration, even storing weapons. Ukrainian authorities have sadly found evidence of this. Patriarch Kirill, the leader of the Russian Orthodox Church, has bizarrely contrived Putin's war and resulting in mass murder of Ukrainian men, women, and children as, quote, an apocalyptic battle against evil, end of quote. Human rights experts have witnessed targeting of pastors and churches by Russian forces in eastern Ukraine, particularly of evangelical Christians. Sacred sites have been destroyed and looted by the hundreds. This is not surprising. Putin imposes widespread restrictions on Christians sharing their faith in Russia. Finally, given that our witnesses are all clergy themselves, I hope we'll be able to discuss what religious communities around the world are doing to support Ukrainians and the role of Christians in Ukraine during wartime. Our esteemed witnesses today are well qualified to speak to the diversity of Ukrainian Christianity. First, we will hear from a video message from Kyiv by His Beatitude Epiphaniy, Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Ukraine, the leader of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. We thank His Beatitude and in particular for his time and his recognition of the importance of the discussion of Ukraine. Next, speaking on behalf of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and coming to us from Ukraine via video is the Most Reverend Metropolitan Yev Strat-E of Bila Terskaya. Joining us in Washington is the Reverend Dr. Igor Bandura and the Vice President of the International Affairs for the Baptist Union of Ukraine. And unfortunately, we learned this morning the Most Reverend Boris Guzak, the Archbishop of the Ukrainian Catholic Archdiocese of Philadelphia and President of the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv, will not be able to join us due to unforeseen family circumstances. I encourage you to read his excellent testimony, which we will be providing to you today. With this, I want to turn to our ranking member, Steve Cohen, for any remarks, and after that, we will hear from the Metropolitan Epiphaniy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is this working okay? No. Does it need to work? Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's this important issue to be discussed. I look forward to the witnesses and their testimony and learning more about the issues with religion. Smart. Thank you. I look forward to hearing from the witnesses and learning more about which religion and the church has played in Russia and in Ukraine. I was in Russia many years ago when I learned about the musical group Pussy Riot, and that they had demonstrated in a church not too far from the Kremlin. Their punishment was way more severe than it should have been, and they were sent to, I believe, to Siberia, and they were punished for quite a while. And the reason, as I was told, was because Putin wanted to have a relationship with Patriarch Kirill as part of a political relationship. And so they used that as a way to show his support for the church. Putin claims to be very religious. I've never known a person who is religious and truly religious in terms of the way religion is supposed to be, not necessarily being a member of an organization, a member of a church, a dues-paying member, and somebody who stands up on Sunday or Friday or whatever the appropriate day is, who is in favor of killing his fellow citizens, condoning the rape of children and women, and the activities that Putin is engaged in Ukraine and other places. Those are far from religious. They're the antithesis of religion. But he has a relationship with Patriarch Kirill, which is really one that's not a holy relationship. And I'd like to learn more about what that relationship has been over the years and how in Ukraine the church is more affiliated with Moscow, if they have actually committed offenses against the state and working for Russia and undermining the Ukrainian efforts. And they deserve justice, but they also should not be working against the Ukrainian state in support of Moscow. So I look forward to the testimony and hope that we will be able to. And I also want to say this, I just came from a program honoring the 75th birthday of Israel. And I read of the religions in our briefing papers in Ukraine. And predominantly they are the Orthodox religions. There are some Catholics, a few Baptists, and some others. Jews are not mentioned. And yet, before Germany and its Nazi invasion and Nazi efforts, there were lots of Jews in Ukraine. In fact, the program I went to was honoring Golda Meir, who immigrated from Ukraine to Milwaukee and then to Israel. There were a lot of Jews in Russia too, and what I've learned lately is that what Jews have been told in Russia is get out. This is not a safe place for Jewish people. So there's all kind of religious persecution going on by Putin in Russia, and there has, of course, historically been by the Nazis in Germany and what they did to the Jews in the Holocaust. And I personally see Putin as the successor to Hitler as far as engaging in genocide against the Ukrainian people and his activities there, which are reprehensible. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Steve Cohen of Tennessee. With this, we'll have a video from Kyiv with his Beatitude the Epiphaniy, Metropolitan of Kyiv and all Ukraine, and the leader of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And we now look forward to the video.
On the stand today in a New York court, writer E. Jean Carroll cross-examined by Donald Trump's legal team in the defamation.
Play that over again.
In a dressing room.
Oh, no.
Just in the interest of bipartisanship, Trump said she wasn't his type. Joe, why don't you translate for us?
Створюють новий вид загрози свободі. В самій Росії відсутня реальна свобода релігії, як на рівні законів, які сильно обмежують можливості діяльності релігійних організацій та ставлять їх під урядовий контроль, так ще більше на рівні практики. Ще гірша ситуація на окупованих Росією територіях України, де всі українські релігійні Шановні члени Конгресу, Сполучених Штатів та учасники цих слухань. На жаль, з об'єктивних причин я не зміг особисто взяти участь у цій важливій події, присвяченій захисту свободи і розповідання однієї з фундаментальних свобод. Ми пишаємося тим, що з початку відновлення незалежності України наша держава була і залишається відданою свободі релігії. Це дозволило після років радянських репресій та державного атеїзму відродити релігійне життя у його різноманітності, створити дієві механізми міжрелігійної та міжконфесійної співпраці, яким є Всеукраїнська Рада Церков і релігійних організацій. В умовах гібридної війни Росії проти України використання Кремлем псевдохристиянської мотивації для виправдання агресії, використання всіх основних релігійних інституцій Росії, в першу чергу Московського патріархату, як інструментів пропаганди та впливу, створюють новий вид загрози свободі. В самій Росії відсутня реальна свобода релігії, як на рівні законів, які сильно обмежують можливості діяльності релігійних організацій та ставлять їх під урядовий контроль, так ще більше на рівні практики. Ще гірша ситуація на окупованих Росією територіях України, де всі українські релігійні організації, нелояльні окупаційній владі, зазнають переслідування. Наших священників викрадають і переслідують, примушують приєднуватися до Московського патріархату та співпрацювати з окупантами. Майно релігійних організацій і громад захоплюють та використовують для потреб окупантів. Всіх громадян України насильно змушують приймати російські паспорти та трактують їх як російських громадян. Без російського паспорту мешканці окупованих територій стають фактично безправними, а структури Російської православної церкви на окупованих територіях фактично стали одним з інструментів впливу та контролю. Про низку конкретних загроз у своєму виступі перед вами розкаже також і митрополит Євстратій. На завершення свого слова я хочу звернути увагу на одну з ключових загроз. Російська православна церква і її керівна структура, Московська патріархія на чолі з Кирилом Гундяєвим не просто співпрацюють з Кремлем. Вони самі стали частиною державного апарату Росії. Московська патріархія не схожа на традиційні релігійні центри. В реальності це російська урядова агенція, яка виконує функції керування з контролю за релігійним життям не лише в Росії та на території поширення російської церкви. Спекулюючи на консервативних цінностях, через цю патріархію Кремль прагне використовувати в якості союзників чи партнерів різні релігійні середовища, зокрема і в Америці. По суті, Московська патріархія в релігійному вимірі є тим, чим агенція Russia Today є в інформаційному просторі, інструментом пропаганди та гібридної агресії. Україна та весь вільний світ повинні реагувати на цей виклик перетворення релігійних інституцій на інструмент агресії та війни. Сподіваюся, що відповідні пропозиції для Конгресу Сполучених Штатів стануть плодом цих слухань. Користуючись нагодою, дуже дякую народу Сполучених Штатів Америки, Конгресу, уряду за підтримку України, нашого народу у боротьбі за свободу проти тиранії. Нехай Бог всіх благословить.
And ladies and gentlemen, we've been joined by our other colleagues, Congressman Emmanuel Cleaver from Missouri, and we also have Congressman Michael Lawler from New York. And it continues the bipartisan composition of this commission, which again, I like to point out, unintentionally, War Criminal Putin has unified Republicans and Democrats to stand up for the people of Ukraine. So we're here and live. And then we've just been joined by Congresswoman Victoria Sparks, and Victoria herself is the first person born in Ukraine who has been elected to serve in the Congress of the United States. And so she is a superstar by herself. So we're really grateful for Victoria's service. And the testimony has been so important that I'm very grateful that Demetra Pappas of the State Department will be reading the English translation of the presentation we just had.
Honorable members of the United States Congress, distinguished guests, I deeply regret that for reasons beyond my control, I am unable to join this important event, dedicated to the protection of religious freedom, one of the fundamental freedoms in person. Ukrainians are proud that from the very beginning of the restoration of Ukraine's independence, our state has been and remains committed to freedom of religion. This has made it possible, after years of Soviet repression and state atheism, to revive religious life in its diversity and to create effective mechanisms of interreligious and interconfessional cooperation, such as the All-Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organizations. In its hybrid war against Ukraine, Russia has unleashed new types of threat to religious freedom, including the Kremlin's use of a pseudo-Christian ideology to justify aggression and the co-opting of all large religious bodies in Russia, most significantly the Moscow Patriarchate, as tools of propaganda and influence. In Russia itself, there is no real freedom of religion, both at the low level of laws that severely limit the activities of religious organizations and put them under governmental control, and even more so at the level of practice. The situation is even worse in the territories of Ukraine occupied by Russia, where all Ukrainian religious organizations are not loyal to the occupation authorities are persecuted. Our priests are kidnapped and harassed, forced to join the Russian Orthodox Church and cooperate with the occupiers. The property of religious communities is seized and used as desired by the occupiers. Ukrainian citizens are forcibly compelled to accept Russian passports and treated as citizens of Russia. Without a Russian passport, residents of the occupied territories become effectively illegal. And the structures of the Russian Orthodox Church in the occupied territories are actually one of the instruments of influence and control. Metropolitan Yevstraiti will, in his address, illustrate a number of specific threats. But in closing my remarks, I want to draw attention to one key threat: the Russian Orthodox Church and its governing structure, the Moscow Patriarchate, headed by Kirill Gundulyev, do not just cooperate with the Kremlin. They themselves have become part of the Russian state apparatus. The Moscow Patriarchate is not like a traditional religious body. In reality, it is a Russian government agency that performs the functions of managing and controlling religious life, not only in Russia, but also everywhere the Russian Church has spread. Professing conservative values through this patriarchy, the Kremlin seeks to recruit a range of religious bodies as partners or allies, particularly in America. In essence, the Moscow Patriarchate is in the religious dimension of what the network RT, Russia Today, is in the information space, an instrument of propaganda and hybrid aggression. Ukraine and the entire free world must respond to this challenge of religious institutions that have been transformed into instruments of aggression and war. I hope that appropriate proposals for the United States Congress will be the fruit of these hearings. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Congress, government, and people of the United States of America for supporting Ukraine, our people in the struggle for freedom against tyranny. May God guide you in your deliberations. May God bless us all. Metropolitan Epiphany.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pappison. What moving testimony and from the heart, you can tell. As we proceed, we now have the most Reverend Metropolitan Yevstraiti of Bila Sarya, and by video. With technical difficulties, we'll proceed immediately to our next witness, and we're so grateful to have Reverend Dr. Igor Bandura with us. He is the Vice President, International Affairs for the Baptist Union of Ukraine. So, Reverend, thank you so much for being here, and we look forward to your testimony.
Dear Mr. Chairman, dear members of the committee, dear attendees, I have the honor to testify before you today representing the Evangelical Protestant Churches of Ukraine. Dear Mr. Chairman, dear members of the committee, dear attendees, I have the honor to testify before you today representing the Evangelical Protestant Churches of Ukraine. Today I speak on behalf of more than 6,000 churches, the largest group of evangelical Protestant churches in Europe. As a minister of a Baptist church, I want to point out that the experience of religious oppression and persecution during the Russian war against Ukraine is common to all evangelical Protestant churches. In the last document that was published on April 11, 2023, after the meeting of the chairman of the Ukrainian parliament Ruslan Stefanchuk with the Ukrainian Council of Churches and Religious Organization on the issue of state-church relations in the context of the Russian war against Ukraine, it was noted, quote, Ukraine is known in the world for its high level of religious freedom, religious pluralism, the absence of a state church, the equality of all religious organizations before the law, developed inter-religious dialogue and cooperation between different churches. During the war, caused by Russian unjustified aggression, a high level of freedom of religion is maintained in Ukraine. There are no religious persecution, and democratic institutions and procedure continue to operate. The end of the quote. The only places where the problems with religious freedom have occurred are the Ukrainian territories occupied by Russia in 2014, and then since the beginning of the massive aggression started on February 24, 2022. The situation also looked depressing since almost all the leaders of main religious denominations in Russia directly or indirectly supported Russia's war against Ukraine and thereby agreed to the suffering of their fellow believers in Ukraine. The concept of religious freedom for all turned out to be not only unacceptable and foreign for the Russian government, which brought destruction and actually invited slavery to Ukrainians, but also aligned to the main religious denominations of Russia, which themselves suffer from restriction of religious freedom by the state. The situation since 2014. Evangelical Protestant churches in the occupied Crimea found themselves in a situation of religious restrictions during the period of the late Soviet Union. All life and activity is localized exclusively in church premises. As one minister testified, quote, they beat us, but they don't even let us cry. This emotional assessment reflects the general situation at the current moment. On the territory of the occupied Lugansk region, Baptist churches, together with Jehovah's Witnesses, were recognized as terrorist organizations, with all the corresponding consequences. All churches have lost their state registration and to this day are in an uncertain status and full restriction of religious right. Churches in the occupied territory of Donetsk region are in a slightly easier situation, but they also do not have legal status and are completely limited in their activities. A sufficient number of testimonies and materials have been collected since 2014 and transferred to various international human rights organizations. I had the honor of being a part of the Ukrainian delegation in 2014 and participating in the similar hearing in the US Congress on the situation with religious restrictions in the territories occupied by Russia. Unfortunately, since then, the situation has only worsened. The situation since February 24, 2022. Since the beginning of the war, and here I can recommend to look these materials, which have some statistics, and also there are 2 pages of testimonies, and through QR code you can go and see video testimonies of real people, pastors and priests, and their experience of being under religious oppression. Since the beginning of the war, 172 church buildings have been significantly damaged or completely destroyed. Among them, Pentecostals 75, Baptists 51, Adventists 24, others 22. The buildings of 3 seminaries were bombed and looted. Among them, Baptists 2 educational institutions in Kherson in Irpin, and Pentecostal 1 educational institution in Kyiv. This is a testimony of president of Tavrisky Christian Institute. Quote, Ukrainian evangelicals have been experiencing various forms of persecution from Russian occupants during the occupation of the Kherson region. This is an example of the religious persecution initiated by the Russian army at the property of the Institute, an evangelical seminary in Kherson, which was occupied on March 11, 2022, and liberated 8 months after. TCI seminary in Kherson was a key evangelical school in the south of Ukraine. However, it was occupied by Russian army and turned into a military base and hospital. Since then, the campus has been robbed and all valuables were stolen. 5 campus buildings were completely ruined, and Christian literature in English and Ukrainian translations was burned or sent to a dump, as Russians consider propaganda literature. Furthermore, Christian paintings were destroyed or stolen. Russian soldiers also threatened local Christians, including TCI staff, by saying that they deserve to be eliminated or dug into the ground. This kind of threat is not only terrifying, but also excludes any church from a right to exist except for the Russian Orthodox Church. The occupation of TCI seminary has had a significant emotional impact on its staff and local Christian community, which cannot be underestimated as it affects the well-being of the local Christian community. Besides, it will have a long-lasting negative impact on the development of evangelical churches and education in the region. It is essential to ensure that the Ukrainian evangelical community in Kherson region can restore its churches and seminaries, and that local believers can go back to worship and education. The end of the quote. 230 churches that belong to the Baptist Union ceased to exist in the occupied territories. Most of the church members and pastors had to leave, saving their lives. These people lost not only their churches, but all their homes and their usual life. Most families are separated. People are scattered all over the country. Thousands were forced to evacuate to Russia. Many are still there, and some found the way out of Russia, and together with millions of others became refugees in European countries and even in the United States of America. The ideology of Russian world, carried by the occupying Russian army, does not tolerate either freedom or freedom of religion. All churches that are not Orthodox or the Moscow Patriarchate must disappear. We are talking about the existential threat for evangelical believers. One example of occupied Vasilievka. On June 12, 2022, armed Russian occupiers came to the local church in the city of Vasilievka, Zaporizhia region, drove everyone out of the house of prayer, conducted a search, then sealed the building, took the keys, and said that totalitarian sects have no place in liberated Vasilievka. The pastor of the church, Mykola Zholovan, was placed under house arrest, having previously confiscated computer disks with all available information. Then, at the end of June, the pastor was arrested and held in the so-called military commandant's office for almost 2 days. In the end, the pastor was released, but the premises of the house of prayer were never returned. Numerous attempts to return it, by the way, the building is a historical monument, were unsuccessful. The church building has not yet been returned to the church. There are many cases of abuse, kidnapping, and torture of pastors and active church members. Of course, we understand that many cases cannot be documented because the number of victims were not ready to give public testimony about the horrors they experienced. Among the main reasons are shame and danger for themselves or their relatives who still stayed at the occupied territories, or those who were forcibly deported to Russia. Just 2 examples. One, Oleg Bondarenko, Pentecostal pastor, is a minister of the Christian Rehabilitation Center attached to the Pentecostal church in the village of Motizhin, Kyiv region. At the beginning of the invasion, the Russians captured his center because they decided that there was a Ukrainian military base there. They said the drug rehab center was a cover. Oleg was arrested and spent 3 days in prison. He himself was tortured and also heard the screams of civilians being killed by Russians. They tied me to the railing, he said. They started practicing blows. Then I was tied to a quad bike and dragged to the base where they tortured people. Oleg was in a well without water for 2 days. When the Ukrainian military counterattacked, Oleg prayed that the Russians would simply forget about him as they retreated. On March 27, he managed to escape. Alexander Salfetnikov is the pastor of the Light of the Gospel Church in Balaklia. This is a city that has been under the occupation of the Russian army since the first days of the full-scale invasion. During the first 2 months of the occupation, Alexander, together with his team of church members, had been helping to evacuate people to peaceful territories and providing humanitarian help to people in need. Every Sunday, he faithfully conducted church services. On May 17, the Russian military arrested him. Russian soldiers came to him, put a bag on his head, and took him to a cell. Although it was designed for 2-3 people, 18 people were there. Later, he was taken to the first interrogation, during which he was severely beaten. Alexander noticed that the interrogation was conducted by a man who furiously hated evangelical Christians. During the second interrogation, Alexander was accused of being an American agent. He was beaten again so that he could not longer stand on his feet. After that, he became so sick that he was taken to the hospital. After the hospital, he was brought home because he could not walk. For a long time, he was carried in a wheelchair. Then he walked with a cane. In this way, God saved him from inevitable deaths. On September 11, 2022, the Church of Evangelical Christian Grace in Melitopol, Zaporizhia region, was occupied by the Russian military. Armed soldiers broke into the church right during the service. They collected the passports of all those present and announced the nationalization of the church building. In addition, the church members were accused of ties to the United States of America. At the beginning of 2023, the church ceased its activities. In January 2023, the Russian occupying army took the house of prayer from Transfiguration Baptist Church in the city of Lysychansk, Lugansk region. They took out everything that was of value to them, and later they settled several dozen Russian soldiers there. Today, those believers who remained in the occupation are deprived of their building and the opportunity to gather together. These are just some real examples of religious persecution. We are aware that the situation with religious oppression in the occupied territories will change only when the Ukrainian army liberates these territories and return Ukrainian jurisdiction there. But we ask everyone involved to continue to monitor the situation and carefully collect and document all the facts of restrictions on religious freedom. All crimes must be punished, and criminals must be brought before international court. Justice and freedom demand our joint efforts and protection. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bandura. We now proceed by video with the Metropolitan Yevstrati of Biya. I think.
Sir, we're going to see if we can get them on the phone. They're still having some technical difficulties. Let's go to questions now, and then once we
Okay, and there's still some technical difficulties, but we're going to proceed. Such an enterprising staff we have here. And as we begin, I want to thank Dr. Bandura for bringing this to our attention, and I hope people will look this up. The Institute of Religious Freedom, the website is irf.in.ua. The email address is info at irf.in.ua. But again, the website, people really need to go to this, irf.in.ua. And this is part of my 5 minutes, and that is that each of us, including the chairman, will be limited to 5 minutes in terms of questions. And then, so this is part of my 5 minutes, but I was so impressed by this document and something also, how important it is that actually real people are cited. It's not just a generic indication. Can you imagine, Emmanuel, that people, this is real. And so the people of the United States around the world need to see the consequence of the persecution of persons of religious faith. And this document is just so helpful and so positive. And I've always said that this particular conflict is going to be unlike any ever. And that is that I really picked this up from a German newspaper, the Handelsbrief, and that is it's a cell phone war. And the incredible opportunity that the people of Ukraine have, the people of the world, is that they can document the atrocities that are occurring almost immediately. And they can also document the individuals committing the atrocities. And then with facial recognition, persons will be identified. And then in line with prosecution of war crimes, they will be brought to justice. And then the chain of command can be determined. And so the Russian troops that are being sacrificed, from my perspective, by Putin and placed in this situation, they should know that their conduct is going to be monitored. No war has ever been committed in such full view as what we have today. So something can come out good out of this. With questions, and Dr. Bandura, you get the opportunity to answer all of them. And so,
Sorry, I was going to say, we do have now the Metropolitan via cell phone, to your point on cell phone wars.
here we go. Well, thank goodness for cell phones. And so now you're going to, so Metropolitan, we're so honored to have you with us.
Yes.
So Metropolitan.
Okay.
And thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And thank you. And we look forward to your testimony. And we're just grateful for your service for the people of Ukraine.
Thank you so much. Honorable members of the United States Congress, fellow participants of these hearings, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to participate in this important gathering. In his address to you, the primate of our Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Metropolitan Epiphaniy, outlined the main challenges facing our country and the world as a result of Kremlin aggression. I would like to focus on one of these in more detail. In both Ukraine and Russia, the majority of the population profess Christianity and adherence to the Orthodox Church. Formally, we recognize the same dogma, we have the same liturgy, we recognize the same canon law. You probably are aware that World Orthodoxy exists as a family of local churches and are independent of each other in matters of governance, but remain united in matters of doctrine and practice of religion. Traditionally, the borders of the territories of local churches coincide with the borders of the states formed by the respective peoples, now or in the past. Therefore, also, we all consider ourselves a single church. Administratively, there are independent churches of Greece and Romania, Bulgaria and Georgia, Cyprus and Serbia, Ukraine and Russia, etc. The Ukrainian and Russian churches were formed and exist under different historical conditions. From the beginning of the creation of the Grand Duchy of Muscovy in 14th century, the Russian Church exists as a state institution. Historically, in Ukraine, the Orthodox Church was a populist institution. So, the problem pointed out by Metropolitan Epiphaniy, namely that the Moscow Patriarchate is a state agency of the Kremlin for religious matters and should be treated as such, is not a new problem. The Moscow Church was formed and for centuries operated in this format. For 3 centuries, where Ukraine was subordinated to Russia, until the end of the last century, the imperial political system of Russia used control over the Orthodox Church in Ukraine as one of the main tools for dissolving Ukrainian identity imperial unification and Russification of Ukraine. Then, when Ukraine regained independence in 1991, a large portion of the Orthodox believers and clergy severed administrative ties with the Moscow Patriarchate, forming a church independent from it. As a fruit of this complex but inexorable movement, this independent church received recognition from the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. We are the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. And at the same time, the structure of Russian Orthodox Church continues to exist in Ukraine, and also it calls itself Ukrainian, and even makes statements about its alleged independence from Moscow, actually remains subordinate to the Moscow Patriarchate. According to independent scientific surveys, today 55% of the population of Ukraine currently identify as members of our independent Orthodox Church of Ukraine, and no more than 4% as the members of the Moscow Patriarchate. But in the early years, especially during the years of dominance of pro-Russian political forces in the government of Ukraine, the Moscow Patriarchate was able to concentrate under its control many temples and religious buildings. And over 3 decades, Moscow has used these structures to vigorously propagate the ideology of Ruski Mir, Russian world, which justifies Russian imperialism and military aggression. The Institute for the Study of War has shown in its research that Moscow used the network of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine for a long time before the invasion to prepare for a rapid offensive and to establish control during the planned occupation. Moreover, some clergy and lay people carry out the Kremlin's plans without even realizing that they are participating in them. In the leadership structure of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine for the past 2 decades, Andrei Derkach, an agent of the Russian Special Services officially recognized by the US government, has played a significant shadow role. Vadim Novinsky, a pro-Russian politician and oligarch who holds the rank of deacon of the Moscow Patriarchate, also has a decisive influence on the leadership of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine. These 2 individuals had, and to a large extent continue to have, shadow control over the activities of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine. We believe that in the interest of countering Russian hybrid aggression and in order to protect freedom of religion, these individuals and those associated with them should be subject to international sanctions. One of the great gifts that the United States Constitution has given the world is the idea that the state must guarantee both free exercise and non-establishment equality for all religions. This concept, which is reflected in Ukraine's modern constitution, requires that the state treat religious practices with respect, but also means that religious bodies are subject to the neutral and universal laws of the land. The state cannot allow any organization, secular or religious, to use its status as a cover for criminal activity, especially activity aiding an invading force during a time of war. The security and protection of Ukraine from Russian hybrid aggression complies a neutral legislative ban on administrative subordination of Ukrainian religious organizations to Russian centers. These centers, not only the Russian Orthodox Church, but also main religious centers of, for example, certain Muslim or Protestant Christian groups, are under the control and influence of the Kremlin and are used to support Russia's war in Ukraine. This is not about interfering with any individual religious practices in Ukraine, but exclusively about taking away from Russia the tool of administrative control of religious bodies in Ukraine. Essentially, the same mechanism would be used as those that recognize the legitimate free press while banning state propaganda outlets, those which keep open the free markets while banning actions which would undermine the nation's sovereignty. At a meeting of Ukrainian Council of Churches and religious organizations with the head of our parliament, all the main religious denominations of Ukraine, with the sole and obvious exception of the Moscow Patriarchate, agreed with the need to adopt such a law and expressed their readiness to participate in its discussion in preparation for the final vote. In conclusion, I would like to thank the Congress, government, and of the people of United States for supporting freedom of religion and to testify that the Orthodox Church of Ukraine is open to cooperation with all interested institutions, including the Helsinki Commission. Thank you, and may God bless you and protect all who today fight for our freedom. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Metropolitan. And we now will proceed to questions, and each of the members of Congress who are here will have 5 minutes, including me, and I lose the first minute because I've already used that up for the beginning. But for both Dr. Bandura and Metropolitan, a question for each of you, and that is, there have been denunciation of Putin's war by priests and religious institutions in Russia, and they've been recently silenced, of course. Outside of Russia, do the Orthodox priests of the Russian Orthodox Church, are they able to speak freely, or are they carefully monitored?
As I see and as I know, it's a great problem that no one hierarch, no one bishop, archbishop, or metropolitan of Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia, in Europe, in America, or anywhere, raise their voice against Putin's aggression. I saw some examples of persecution from church leadership of Moscow Patriarchate, those priests who raised their voice against war. For example, it had happened in Lithuania, where a group of Orthodox priests from eparchy of Moscow Patriarchate, from very beginning, had the official statement against Russian aggression, and very quickly, Metropolitan of Moscow Patriarchate in Lithuania put them under repression, banned for them to perform liturgies and so on. And finally, for more than half of the year, they was under canonical church oppression, and then they was accepted as a clergy to Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. I know about one parish in Holland that transferred from Moscow Patriarchate to Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople, Russian community, for the same reason that they don't share official position of Moscow Patriarchate supporting Putin's aggression. But in generally, it's a pity to say, but Moscow Patriarchate, unfortunately, in their leadership, including hierarchs of Russian Orthodox Church in United States and in Europe, they keep silent or try to justify in some ways Russia's political position.
Well, thank you, Metropolitan, and that is sad, but thank you for making that revelation. And then, in lieu of a question, I'd like to again refer people to the Institute for Religious Freedom, the website irf.in.ua. Email it is info@irf.in.ua. The reason I'm hoping that again using the cell phone technology, that the destruction of different religious sites within Ukraine can be documented and then provided to the world, because the looting needs to be identified and recognized. We now proceed in the most bipartisan fashion to Congressman Emanuel Cleaver of Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm struggling trying to understand more than on a surface level how the Russians are using the church. Can you help me? What is the theology that is being used? I mean, is there a theology that the Russian people are fed? That Jesus was Russian, or I mean, what? I'm not sure I know how to ask the question differently. There's something that is generally used to capture people to one side, and particularly if it is the evil side. I'm trying to think of a synonym for evil, but it's hard for me to just accept that a large segment of the population would just follow the Russian Orthodox Church unless there is an appealing theology.
So Metropolitan or Dr. Bandura, if you'd like to answer. And hey, something you should be aware, and that is that Congressman Cleaver is really speaking from the heart. He himself is a Baptist minister, and so he has the background of theological interest and concern and devotion. But either one of you who would like to answer.
I try to do so first. Unfortunately, as I told in my statement, and as Metropolitan Epiphaniy told in his video message, we must divide in our consideration our attitude to Russian Orthodox Church as a community of believers and clergy, historical community of Christians in Russia, with huge amount of examples of sanctity, of dedication to Christianity and so on, and ruling structure, Moscow Patriarchy, as Kremlin's agency for religious affairs and control over Russian Orthodox Church and Orthodox activity. Patriarch Kirill Gundyaev himself and his entourage, they just use religious language. They just use gospel, names of Lord Jesus and saints to justify current Kremlin policy. It reminds me the time of Soviet Union, when Moscow Patriarchy was totally controlled by Soviet government. And you know that officially this patriarchy told, especially outside Soviet Union, that they have no persecution, they have no interference in religious matter from Soviet government and so on. But in reality, it wasn't true. And now we can see the same. Russian Orthodox Church as a community of believers, I would like to use this term, they are in captivity by government. They controlled by government. And from inside of this church, especially from Russia, it's not possible to have independent voice for, with the exception of very few people who are so brave to criticize this position of Kirill Gundyaev and official leadership of Moscow Patriarchate. But unfortunately, they just use their position as a Christian leaders, as an official representative of the church, to justify Kremlin policy. But in reality, Kirill Gundyaev, other top hierarchs, are just somebody comparable with other Russian top officials, like Sergei Lavrov, who is the chief of Russian diplomacy, or Shoigu, who is the chief of Russian army. Kirill Gundyaev is official of Kremlin administration for religious affairs. And I think it's not possible to find in his position something which is really related with Christianity, Orthodoxy, Gospel, and Jesus' teaching. Thank you.
Metropolitan, thank you very much.
I spent time in Turkey. On Thursdays, the government, Erdogan, they would send out the message to all the mosques for Friday, for the service. And so they controlled the theology. I mean, the Nazis, they slayeth our Lord. We need to get rid of them. They slayeth our Lord. I mean, there's always something. The Crusaders, 12 million people slaughtered in the name of serving the Lord. There's something, and I apologize if I can't connect it right now. Please.
There is theology behind that, but unfortunately bad theology.
Yeah,
and it's
I'm
not
sure.
only theology, but a mixture of theology, nationalism, and imperial spirit.
Okay.
There is a concept of the third Rome. Moscow is the third Rome. There was one Rome, then the second one, and the third one. And the prophecy was this is the last one. And according to this idea, Russia is the last blessing, messianic blessing for the rest of the world. The West is morally corrupted. The West is liberal. The West neglected biblical conservative values, and Russia is the last defender of traditional values, and Russia is the messianic power to rescue the rest of the world and bring the pure gospel back to the world. This is something bigger than it's a mixture of different ideas, but this is behind all of that. And this is why under these beliefs, it's easy for Russian both statesmen and religious leaders to say that it is not the war, but it is a special military operation. What difference it makes? But for them, it difference. If it is special military operations, then you can kill Russians, Ukrainians. If you believe that the simplest confession of faith of all Christians is very short, Jesus is Lord. But it seems like in Russia it is state is Lord. So now everybody should pay legacy to the state. And then the state is the main one. So the state dictate to the church what to do. And all the theology is behind that. So there is theology, but it is bad theology. And in fact, as many Orthodox churches already stated, it is a modern heresy. The ideology of Russian world is a modern heresy, and it was already condemned by several largest Orthodox church in the world.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The theologist is thinking. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Cleveland. We now proceed to Congressman Mike Lawler, and we can recognize that he was bright enough to marry a member of the Orthodox Church. So, Congressman Lawler, all the way from New York.
Thank you, Chairman. My wife is from Moldova. She is Christian Orthodox. So I've been there. I've been in the Orthodox churches in Moldova. But as religious leaders, what message do you have for those using religion to justify violence? I think all of us here certainly are of the belief that, frankly, that is the opposite of what religion is supposed to be doing. And religion is about unifying, bringing people together and in faith and, forging ahead to a more peaceful future. So what would you say as religious leaders to those in Moscow or elsewhere that are using religion as a vehicle to promote violence and hatred and destruction across the world?
And Metropolitan, if you could proceed first, and then we'll go to Dr. Bandura.
Thank you for your question. I think that in your question it's possible to hear the answer because evil have no justification. Evil itself, lie itself, it have no justification. And from very beginning, we tried to call religious leaders in Russia open their eyes, open their ears, open their mind, and to understand that Russian aggression and justification of Russian aggression, it is not just against Ukraine or against Europe or global West or United States. It's against Russia itself, because sooner or later Putin's regime will fall down. But Russian nation and Russian religious leaders will bear this responsibility for decades. It reminds me phenomena of so-called German Christians who support Protestants and Catholics who support Nazi regime. After World War II, Christian churches in Germany goes through the process of reticence and recognizes that they behave and did wrong against gospel and Jesus teaching. And now we see the same process. And lessons of history from that time must remind these leaders that sooner or later truth will prevail. But everybody who tries to justify evil will be responsible and must bear this responsibility in front of mankind and indeed in front of God himself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Metropolitan. We now proceed to Dr. Bandura.
I think the message of all religious leaders should be very clear. There is no justification of aggression on religious basis in the Bible, in the Quran, in the Torah. This should be should be stated and repeated constantly and very clear. Everything else is misinterpretation and misrepresentation of religious view. I may mention the well-respected chief rabbi of United Kingdom, who passed away 2 years ago, Jonathan Sachs. He's very clear on that. He gives many testimonies, just speaking about three religions that basically are descendants of Abraham, just Christian, Jewish people, and Muslim people. And he, in his book, he gives many examples from the first book of the Bible, sharing the examples how descendants of Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob, even despite they were like two different lines, they were looking for peaceful coexistence. And he gave good lessons for us modern religious leaders, how we can build relationship and trust even with those who are not believing God as we do. Ukraine is a very good example of religious peace and understanding, because the Council of Churches and Religious Organizations consists with all Christian churches, Orthodox, Catholic, Greek Catholics, evangelicals, but it also includes Jewish community in Ukraine and Muslim community in Ukraine. And even in the document I cited in my presentation was anonymously accepted by all these people. So we work in the agreement. We have very respectful relationship between leaders. We have tested history of 25 years of working together on the issue and matters that are important for our people. And this is an example when we speak in the one voice against the war, against the aggression. And I believe this is the best way to represent religious truth about war and war crime and religious oppression in our time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bandura. And we now proceed to Congressman Mark Vesey of Texas.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much and appreciate this hearing, because I think that this is really important. We've seen in past conflicts around the world where religion, religious symbols, those things have been, used against people, sometimes for psychological warfare reasons, but certainly they have been used against people and countries, for some sort of a gain. And I was just, wondering, how has Russia's physical destruction of churches and places of religious significance affected the people of Ukraine?
In this document that I shared, you can find it. You can pay attention that 494 church buildings and holy places have been either destroyed or severely damaged.
Yeah, how many of those are, and I'm not sure if they keep things like historical records or historical markers in Ukraine, but how many of those would be considered of historical significance?
I would say at least 1/3 of these buildings.
Yeah. Wow.
But as a matter of fact, if you look this to the bottom of the page, you will find out that the biggest number of churches destroyed belongs to Moscow Patriarchate. You know, so it is a tragedy because they are standing for the war and they destroyed the churches that belong to their fellow Christians, that belong to their church. And it is a tragedy. So we should stop that.
Yeah. Yeah. What about, because there is a commonality, throughout the entire region, whether it's Moldova, Romania, I think that I was reading in one of the testimonies that said that, there's even a common liturgy, that is shared. Do you think that long term this is going to cause a split to where, that sort of commonality is shared, will no longer take place anymore, that all of these different countries will sort of form, their own, offshoots or maybe even new religions that sort of look very similar to the ROC, but may not exactly, be like they look today?
From our perspective of leaders of evangelical Protestant churches, the matter of fact is the relationship between state and church. Like in Ukraine, we do not have state church. All the churches are equal, and because of this, we have peaceful relationship and we can work together. Like in Moldova, if you have democracy and you have separation of church and state, you do not have much of the problems. But in Russia, what we understand, the church is connected with the state. And in fact, the church became like a department of state. And here you have all the differences. And here you have all the problems and divisions. I think Orthodox people can speak on their experience, but from our side, as long as you have this unity between church, Orthodox Church, and state, you would have problems, and such state as Russia would always use religion and Orthodox Church in their own causes against the neighbors. Because we should realize it's not about like two countries, one Muslim and the other is Christian.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking about two Christian countries. We are talking about majority of people in Ukraine and in Russia believe they are Orthodox people.
Yeah.
So why they are fighting?
Right.
Why Russian Orthodox Patriarch preached something like we called Orthodox jihad, when he said, if you go to fight against Ukraine and you would die at the front line, you would go right to paradise. It's not Christian theology. There was nothing like that even in Orthodox Church. But this is the consequences of church being a part of the state politics and state propaganda.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. Okay.
Thank you
very much.
Dr.
Yield back.
Bandura. And Metropolitan, would you like to comment?
Yes, I would like to add that it is not split between churches, Russian Orthodox Church and Ukrainian Orthodox Church. I told in my statement that we both are local, independent in our governance, in our administrative matters, churches, but we are the same family, the same Orthodox Church. But it is a split between church and something which try to control church life and which pretend to represent church voice and to be a representative of church public faith. And it is a real split because Moscow Patriarchy and leadership of Moscow Patriarchy and Patriarch Kirill Gundyaev himself, he pretend to be a religious leader, pretend to be a patriarch, but in reality, as top official, personally very rich man, real oligarch, and one of the top propagandists of Kremlin, he and his collaborators, they just use their position in the church to spread Kremlin aggressive ideology, which have no real ground in Orthodox Christianity, Jesus' teachings, etc. And this is a split, not between churches, but it is split between truth and lie, light and darkness, good and evil. And this split must be because we know from Gospel that Jesus told that he brings the sword to this world, the sword of truth, which divide and create a wall, a border between truth and untruth, good and evil. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Metropolitan. Now we proceed with the extraordinary insight of Congresswoman Victoria Spartz.
One of those Christians that was baptized secretly when I was little. I have very good understanding of what's happening, but I have a question for you. As you know, I would say Russia is involved in ethnic cleansing and oppression of minorities for a long time. And what's happening even in this war, a lot of minorities are sent to die in large numbers, and a lot of them are not Christians. So have you heard from any Buddhist or Muslim leaders on anything actually commenting on anything what's happening right now in oppressions that happening within Russia of a lot of minorities dying in large numbers? Any of them express any concerns with that and oppression?
Yes, I do not know about Buddhists because this is probably a minority of minorities. But Muslim community is mainly located in Crimea. And since 2014, they are under great pressure. And usually when...
I'm talking about around the world. Right now, a lot of republics within Russia are not Christians. A lot of, Russians that fighting and dying in large numbers, they're from regions of Russia. Siberia has been oppressed by Moscow for a while. So, and using oppression of religion on a lot of these minorities. Russia had wars on that. Chechnya is an example, but there are a lot of others that are not Christians. So have you heard from any leaders around the world raising concern that there is oppression of religious freedom within Russia and what's happening right now?
Yes, not as many as we would like, but for example, when we have had a Ukrainian week here in Washington just recently, before that there was 3 days conference or summit for religious persecution, and I was presented there. And many worldwide leaders, both political and religious, are standing and speaking boldly and openly about the situation in Russia. So I think we should speak more about that, but it depends how people value the religious freedom, because for some it is nothing. If you have working economy, if you have a strong army, religious freedom is not an issue. But for us, we understand it is one of the basics.
I understand. I don't know Metropolitan wants to. If you've heard from other leaders around the world raising this concern.
So Metropolitan,
Specifically religious leaders, Muslim religious leaders, Buddhist religion, and oppressions and that happening of freedom of religion within Russia with minorities. It just, if no, it's no. I heard my question.
I have no clear answer for your question because, for decades, Russian government and official representatives of Russian religious institutions, established institutions, including Muslim institutions, Buddhist institutions, they had a lot of contacts with different religious centers in communities around the globe. And they use their influence in different religious communities to justify Kremlin policy. And in religious matters, in religious affairs, including religious affairs, it reminds me times of Soviet Union, that in reality, everybody outside Soviet Union knows that persecutions exist. And churches, church of majority and church minorities are persecuted. But officially, all religious centers in Soviet Union told that they don't know about any persecution, everything is according to law, etc. And it's a problem because in reality, in Russia, is no freedom of religion. The so-called Yarovaya law that limited every aspect of church and religious lives. Even officially registered communities have huge limits in their activity and must have permission for any kind of specific activity like teaching for children, teaching children or religion or preaching publicly religion, etc. And it's a problem that until now, Russia treated more or less not like dictatorship and tyranny without real freedom, including freedom of religion. But until now, Russia treated like a state equal with other reasonable states. But in reality, Russia's religious, example of Jehovah's Witnesses, which they are totally banned. I would like to raise the example of one of Jewish community in Russia, which faced the expelling of their leader, their chief rabbi, because this chief rabbi don't want publicly support Kremlin's policy. He just keeps silent, but Russian administration forced him publicly support so-called special military operation, and then because he don't publicly support Kremlin's policy, he was expelled from his position of chief rabbi and even forced to leave Russia, and now he living in Israel. And I think after collapse of Putin regime, we will find a huge amount of evidences, like we know now have huge amount of evidences from Soviet time of persecution of leaders of the religious denominations, including minorities in Russia. But now I think it's a very important matter to keep an eye, keep and watch over this situation inside Russia with religious freedom for all, including minorities.
Thank you. My time has expired, but I appreciate your comment, and I know that to your comment, Russian disinformation propaganda does work here in Europe too, unfortunately, and we do some stupid things. But I would like maybe was to comment not already here, but to the team related to the proposed legislation dealing with religious institution connected on Russia, on the Ukrainian law. But I know that my time has expired, but maybe you can share your thoughts later directly with the staff. I'd appreciate that.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Sparks. And we now proceed to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee of Texas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To the witnesses, thank you. We are, many of us, diverse religions in this country, but we are certainly aware of the higher power of religion and how religion can be the source of inspiration, the source of freedom, but it can also be used as the despot Putin to intimidate, to murder and kill, and to deny people their precious rights of religious freedom. This war is horrific. The voice of the church needs to be heard. And it is sad for me to hear that the Putin regime has directly taken over the Ukraine Orthodox Church, that they are pushing out the venom of the right or righteousness of the war that Russia has against Ukraine. I want to see the faith community in the United States be as helpful as they possibly can, and I'd be eager to hear of your thoughts about the overall faith community here. And as well, have you heard of the dastardly, the bad behavior of Russia in stealing Ukrainian children? That certainly should go against the faithful, the people of faith. And so I'd be interested in your thoughts about that. I just want to take a scripture-based story that reminds us of what should happen here. When Jesus went into the temple and people were doing things that were inappropriate, they were doing wrong things, he proceeded to send them out of the temple. Send them out because they were wrong, and they were, in essence, creating a atmosphere of almost crime against religious beliefs. So, two things, if I can: what the faith community has been doing, what do we need to do, and what the faith community can do about the stealing of Ukrainian children. That seems to be something they should be concerned about.
It's a huge tragedy because the number of children forcefully sent to Russia, and we do not know about their destiny. We do not know how many children have been adopted to Russian families and how many how we would be able to bring them back. But the matter was raised, and you know that Russian President Putin and the chairman of this committee that is in charge for this, or ombudsman, children ombudsman in Russia, are under criminal persecution now just because of this crime, stealing children. The number is terrific. and all the children were brought to Russia under the idea to bring them to safe territories,
Yeah.
which is terrible. You come to destroy somebody's life, and then you save their children from whom? From yourself. And but the work is going on, and I think international pressure is very important. And we hope that Ukraine would be able to bring back most of these children. I would raise another concern, not only the children that was literally stolen from Ukraine and sent to Russia. I would also raise a concern about family divided, because 8 million of people left Ukraine and spread it all around European countries and the United States. And most of them are women with children. And now children are growing without fathers.
Yes.
Children are under stress of being in new circumstances, schools where they do not understand the language. And it's just terrible, terrible experience. So it's not only about children stolen, it's also children in divided families. And it is also growing children that became orphans because of their fathers were killed in the war. So these three groups of children are our great concern, and we need to international community to keep this, to speak about this, to pressure Russia to change the situation for better.
Thank you, Dr.
May I
Bandura.
quickly just add one quick word?
Well, hey, even better. I want the Metropolitan to also answer
That's
the very heartfelt question by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was what I was going to do. Can I add to Metropolitan to tell me about the murder of religious leaders, the extent of murder of religious leaders? If I could hear about that, I'd appreciate it. If the Metropolitan could answer that. Thank you. I yield.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's so important question because, first of all, I would like to add to answer of Dr. Bandura that a forced replacement of children from Ukrainian territory to Russia is an act of genocide.
Yes.
One of the many examples of genocide, because such behavior, such action is clearly indicated in international law as one of acts of genocide. Concerning the killing or persecution of religious leaders, now we know about 15 persons affiliated with our church, priests, and other church persons from our church who have been killed by Russians during the great-scale aggression. And I know that in other religious communities, they have those who been killed by Russians' aggression. But the main issue is that it's not just incidents. It's not just part of war action, but it's part of general line of Russian behavior on occupied territories, because it's designed from very beginning, even before full-scale aggression, that when Russian troops went to particular settlement, city or town or village. The Russian security services immediately start to find who is leaders of local community. Political leaders like local mayor, business leaders like owner of main business in this town, and religious leaders. And we know, I know from my personal experience, because local priest of our church in Bucha, near Kyiv, very known city, unfortunately, because the act of genocide. Father Andrei, who is a rector of St. Andrew's Church in Bucha, he lived this city on March 3 last year, just a few days after the occupation of Bucha. And next day, when he lived in his home, somebody from Russian side tried to find him and asked his neighbors, where is this priest? And I know from other priests from occupied territories of Kherson and other places that immediately Russians tried to find, kidnapped, forced these church leaders to be collaborators. They tried to scare them. One priest told that Russians told him, if you don't be with us, we will rape your wife, we will kill your children, and then we will kill you. This is one option. Another option, you must sign agreement of cooperation. And this is not incident, but it's a general design to create atmosphere of fear. If such respectable persons in local community are not protected from Russian attacks, from Russian persecution, you, local inhabitants, have no real protection from new authorities. You must be loyal, because if you will not be loyal, you will face it with very bad consequences. And it's a main problem. I would like to underline repeatedly that it's not a fault of particular soldiers or somebody else, but it's a part of general design of occupation of Ukraine, to find the local leaders and force them to be collaborators, or persecute them, beat them, kidnap, prison them, and even kill them. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, and Metropolitan, thank you so much, and I want to thank Congresswoman for being here. Actually, both Congresswomen, how fortunate we are. And as I conclude, again, I want to refer people to the Institute for Religious Freedom. The website is irf.in.ua. And people need to look this up. It's so revealing and so well done. And with this, I'd like to thank everybody for their participation, the extraordinary staff of the Helsinki Commission. And with this, we are adjourned.
Laura.